Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for coming. First, let me start off by saying that the event in May is a clear reminder to all of us that floods are very dangerous events. Bill, could we get the right bank lights up here?
Yes, sir.
Thanks. We also want to emphasize that our sympathies continue to go out to all the families who were affected by this event, some of whom are included in the Nashville district. Our primary goal going forward is to execute our responsibilities as the nation's water resource managers in a responsible manner that improves on the lessons that we learned from this event and that primarily focuses on public safety, which is always our #1 priority. Now, you have in packets that we provided you several documents I want to highlight, and these are also available publicly on the FTP site that should have been referenced earlier. You have the actual, you have Appendix B from the AAR, from the After Action Review. That is the appendix that goes into the details of the lessons. Okay? You should also have a fact sheet, which on one side covers the key points that we got out of of what happened during the event, and on the other side covers all the key lessons learned from the event and some of the highlights of the lessons learned. As we go through, we do have a PowerPoint presentation that's also in your slide that you can refer to after the briefing. The reason we're doing a slide presentation is because some of the pictorial representations of the maps and the waterfall help illustrate the magnitude and the enormity of this event, which was truly unique in the experience of all those who were involved in dealing with it. Now, the actual AAR is not in your packet because it's a little bit too big for your packet, but it's about a 2-inch thick document. For those who are really interested in understanding what happened, you need to read this document. It's very thick, but it's also very detailed and very comprehensive. The way it differs primarily from the draft After Action Review, which we published back in July, is it's more clearly organized, and there's a lot more detail associated with a number of the factors related to what we learned primarily, which is in communications. That remains the biggest issue, the biggest area for improvement for us to work on going forward as we execute our responsibilities in flood risk management. As I did when I testified before the Appropriations Subcommittee back in July, I want to emphasize 3 things right up front. First of all, this rain event was indeed an unprecedented, one could say historic event that far surpassed the forecasts that we were provided beforehand, and it also far surpassed the previous experiences of all the professionals who had dealt with other floods. Second, the Nashville District folks who responded to this event did so, in our judgment, competently, adaptively, and in some cases heroically for those people who were actually out on the project sites, literally fighting waters that was lapping at their boots, ready to come over some of the projects. However, third, this event clearly exposed inadequacies in our system of flood response, primarily but not exclusively in the area of communication. I'm responsible for this. We're going to fix this. Now, let's go ahead and go on to the slide presentation. First slide, please, Bill. Okay. This is also hard copies in billboard fashion are displayed to your right in the conference room here. This was a record-breaking rainfall event in several aspects. If you look at the box in the lower left-hand corner of this slide, you can see a number of data points that indicate, in terms of a rainfall and a weather event, the magnitude of this occurrence. In Nashville alone, we had 13.5 inches of rain in 36 hours. Up to 17 inches in many areas to the south and west of Nashville, and in a few isolated locations over 19 inches of rain. 2 days before the event occurred, the forecast was on the order of 3 to 6 inches. Now typically, the forecasts we get from the Weather Service tend to err on the conservative side, on the high side. And so we expected that we would have a serious weather event. We expected that we would have flooding in tributaries. And even though our models indicated we would not have flooding in the main stem of the Cumberland River, Mr. Bob Sneed, who I'd like to raise his hand, Bob, who's the water management chief here in Nashville, made the decision to draw down the pools in Old Hickory and behind Cordell Hall to increase the minimal amount of storage capacity that's in those pools. Unfortunately, in terms of our flood risk management projects and where they're located, this rain event occurred primarily, the heaviest rain occurred in basins where we don't have flood risk management projects to hold back water. And we'll go into that in a little more detail in a second. Next slide. Okay, a couple things I'd like to highlight from this slide. First of all, our system was inadequate, both in terms of the location of the flood risk management projects and in terms of our processes to internally respond to these events and our processes to communicate with the Weather Service and other agencies. That is a blunt, brutal fact. The reason it was inadequate is because all of our prior experience focused us on extreme events that were of a lesser nature. So we could handle major flood events like the one that occurred in 1975 that approached a 500-year event, close to a 500-year event in terms of flooding. But that's not what occurred in this event. It was orders of magnitude greater than that. We had a very deliberate process that allowed us to coordinate on a scheduled basis with the Weather Service that was completely overwhelmed by this event. Typically, we make changes in our gate operations at our flood risk management projects a handful of times a day at the most during a major flood event. In this case, we made, for example, at Old Hickory Lock and Dam, 40 gate changes, and they were coming as frequently as every 15 minutes. Now, when you have a communication system that depends on talking to your partners a couple of times a day, and you're making gate changes every 15 minutes, you clearly don't have a system that's adequate for the rain event and the flooding event that's occurring. And that's exactly what happened in this instance. This was a record-setting flood. If you look at this graphic on the lower right-hand part of the slide, you will see that we had both in terms of lake, or what we call pool elevations, and in terms of project discharges, which is the amount of volume of water that's flowing through the projects, records, and those are the ones indicated in red. And you can see we came close to the records, even as far down the system as Barkley Lock and Dam. 4 different other flood events were surpassed in one measure or another during this single event in early May. The other thing I want to highlight by this is the kind of projects that we have. And we'll talk about this in a little more detail next slide, but the next slide has a lot of graphics on it, so I don't want to allow you to be confused here. The blue projects, Barkley, J. Percy Priest, Center Hill, Dale Hollow, and Wolf Creek Dam, those are designed primarily for flood risk management purposes, to hold back water when we have heavy rains. The red projects, Cheatham Lock and Dam, Old Hickory Lock and Dam, Cordell Hall Lock and Dam, are primarily for navigation and hydropower purposes. Okay? They do have very minor water storage capacity, but with any major rain event, whether it's this or any other, those capacities, unless there's something upstream holding water back, can be quickly overwhelmed. Next slide, please.